Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C-Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. We continue our look into the He-Man series with the spin-off that, while not as popular as He-Man, did succeed enough to keep the franchise alive for a few more years. This is my look at 1985's Shira, Princess of Power. The original Shira series began in 1985, only a few months after the original He-Man series was cancelled due to the dwindling sales of the toy line. Two of the writers from the He-Man series, Larry DiTillo and J. Michael Straczynski, were the head writers of this new show, with several others coming in to write for the show. While Shira did last for 2 seasons, just like He-Man, it only lasted for 93 episodes, whereas He-Man lasted for 130 episodes. There is no definitive reason why the show didn't last as long as He-Man, but from what I've been able to find out, it was based on 2 reasons. One was due to the low sales of the toys, and 2 was that the show was mishandled a lot by the producers of the series. While the writers had a lot of freedom in making He-Man, they had less freedom in writing Shira because of the pressure they had to make sure that the violence was kept to a minimum, as many parent groups didn't want to see a female character use excessive force in a series made for kids. The show picks up in Eternia with the sorceress dreaming about Adora, He-Man's twin sister, who was kidnapped and raised on another planet called Etheria by the wicked and evil world-conquering armies of the Horde. The sorceress summons Adam to Castle Grayskull to send him on a quest to find her and give her the other sword that she has been guarding, the Sword of Protection. From there, Adora regains her memories and uses the Sword of Protection to transform into the leader of the Great Etherian Rebellion as Shira and to help them defeat the armies of the Horde and their commander, Hordak. Much like how I did He-Man's cast, I will be splitting up the cast into 2 different factions and only focus on the characters that played a major role in the show. So let's begin with... Princess Adora, aka Shira, voiced by Melanie Britt. Adora is a character that in my opinion was much more interesting than that of her brother. She was raised by the villains and has believed that they were always right since one of the villains brainwashed her into believing that what she was doing was right. Once she was released from the Horde's control, she thankfully stayed interesting and grew as a character. While she was still written as a typical 80s heroine, I like that the writers were able to make her stand out from the other heroines of the era by making her still learn about the world around her while she also makes use of her military knowledge to help the rebellion. Spirit, aka Swiftwind, voiced by Lou Scheimer. Unlike Cringer, Swiftwind was brave and willing to go into battle with Shira, and just like her, learned about the world around them. Unfortunately, this led to Swiftwind becoming one of the most forgettable characters in the show, since he didn't have any character trait other than being brave, wise, and sounding like he smoked 1,000 Marlboros. Even episodes that focused on him put him in the background and made him do very little compared to Cringer, who was always in the foreground of his episodes. Glimmer, voiced by Linda Gary. Glimmer is the leader of the rebellion and is the ruler of the Kingdom of Brightmoon. She's a character that, while is a gullible and sometimes clumsy moron, was written to be a competent and well-thinking leader. After her mother and father were kidnapped by the Horde, Glimmer had to pull up her big girl pants and take control of not only her kingdom, but became the leader of the rebellion until Adora showed up. She's one of the few girl characters that I can see being a good role model for people to look up to and to try to be like, unlike a certain similar character from the other version of this show. Bo, voiced by George DeCenzo. Bo is one of the main leaders of the rebellion who is known for his trademark weapon, a bow. One thing I like about Bo is that while he's the typical trickster-type character, he's not an annoying dark edgelord character who stays away from people so that he doesn't hurt those around him. Especially since he likes to do magic tricks for the children of Etheria and makes sure to put a smile on their face to keep up their hope. Cowl, voiced by Lou Scheimer. Cowl was pretty much the Rebellion's animal mascot character, which was a combination of an owl and a koala bear that would often come on adventures against his will. He was pretty much the cringer of the team, except he was useful in helping get the members of the Rebellion out of danger. He's also my favorite character in the show for just being sarcastic and snide in certain situations. While he's not as useful as some of the others, he's still willing and able to go into battle to keep his friends safe, as well as Adora's secret, as he and two other characters know about who she is. Madame Razz and Broom, also voiced by Linda Gary. Madame Razz is the Rebellion's version of Orko, as you can tell by their designs looking so similar. Hell, they had an episode where they worked together to save He-Man and Shira. She had powerful magic, but unlike Orko, whose magic would always screw up because of how different Etherian magic forces work, Madame Razz's power didn't work because she's old and would often forget how the spells would work. But to be fair, she did get her spells right more times than Orko did. Her other difference from Orko was that she had a talking flying broom named, well, Broom, who was also voiced by Lou Scheimer. He was basically another Cowl who would make sarcastic comments and would help Madame Razz remember to cast her spells correctly. He was also one of my favorite characters for just being the sarcastic voice of reason for the Rebellion, and even had a great episode with Cowl. Much like how there were other characters from He-Man's universe, I mostly wanted to focus on these characters since they were the ones who had the most focus. Other characters who were important but didn't really stand out include Queen Angela, Castaspella, Seahawk, and Lighthope. I will talk more about these characters when I discuss the remake of the show, but until then I will say these aren't bad characters, but some of them are quite forgettable. But for now, let's discuss. Hordak, voiced by George DeCenzo. Hordak was the main general of the Horde invasion and was the reason Skeletor became the main villain of Eternia, since Skeletor also worked with the Horde and was the apprentice of Hordak. Hordak was also the one who kidnapped Adora when she was a baby and escaped to Etheria. Hordak is a very similar character to Skeletor in that they are written to be these goofy yet terrifying villains, except unlike Skeletor, he answered to a higher power, that of Horde Prime. He's not a terrible villain, but because he did have to answer to another much more threatening villain, and because he had more comedic moments in the show, it does make him feel more like a lackey rather than an intimidating villain. Shadow Weaver, voiced by Linda Gary. Shadow Weaver was the evil Lyn of the Horde, but she is much more interesting than evil Lyn because they took away her humanity and made her a monster. She uses her magic to brainwash Adora and tortures others to make sure her spells work or to see how much more power she can gain. She's one of the few threatening villains and honestly would have made a better leader than Hordak, but they made her the lackey because we need to make another evil Lyn character. Catra, voiced by Melanie Britt. Catra was Adora's rival and eventually replaced her as the captain to the Horde troops. Unfortunately, much like the other He-Man villains, the villains for Shira had great designs, but were one-note and boring. Catra was essentially the 60s version of Batman's Catwoman, where she would constantly talk like what people thought a humanoid cat would talk like. Her only power was that when she put on the mask that she wears on her head, she could turn into a panther that had all the abilities of the panther. While this was a cool power that had an interesting design, much like the other He-Man villains, she wound up to similar characters like Beastman or Trapjaw. Imp, voiced by Erica Scheimer. Imp was a shape-shifting demon-looking character that could disguise himself as any object and would constantly spy on the Rebellion. Surprisingly, Imp was one of the few characters that wasn't a counterpart to a He-Man villain. He was a competent villain who never got caught by anyone and was one of the few characters that got rewarded for his efforts. You could argue that he was the mascot for the Horde, but unlike Cowl, who would run away from danger, he was able to get into the Rebels' camp and reported to Hordak of their plans. So yeah, we have a competent villain in a series filled with one-note dummies that never got anything done right. Who knew? Those are just a few of the villains that are important, but the rest are just one-note joke characters that became punching bags, including Mantenna, Leech, and Grizzlor. Most of the pauses that are in this show are the background designs. While Eternia was a world that had integrated technology into the fantasy-like world, Etheria is a fantasy world that is being invaded by technology from the Horde, who also get great backgrounds showing off how dark and disturbing their area is after what they've done to this part of Etheria. It amazes me how much I can remember backgrounds of 80s and 90s cartoons for how bright and colorful they are compared to modern shows that feel dark and lifeless. This show only had two problems that I was able to find upon rewatching it. First is how weak the writing is compared to He-Man. While I wouldn't call the original He-Man series high grade in terms of writing, you could tell that there was effort put into the show which helped create the world of He-Man. The opposite happened with Shira, with episodes mostly focusing on the group fighting the Horde rather than having a lot of adventures on Etheria, which can be boring for those who might want to see something closer to the original He-Man. The second thing wrong with the show is the way they wrote the end of each episode. One of the most annoying things about the He-Man and Shira shows is the tacked-on message at the end of every episode. Well, in Shira, they made this worse by having one character give you the message named Lookie, voiced by Erica Scheimer. He was at the end of each episode and would tell the moral of the episode after he asked you if you found him hiding in the episode's background. He did get one episode where he and Shira would go and save his people from a Horde prison, but other than that one episode, Lookie was honestly one of the most forgettable characters on the show, but he always popped up in every episode, which drove me crazy. While this show does resemble He-Man in many ways, it does fall short in the writing department, mostly because of the writing staff losing Larry DiTillo and J. Michael Straczynski after they left for not having gotten the credit for writing most of the episodes in Season 1. But that doesn't mean it's all terrible. The show still has great backgrounds, likable characters, and a decent premise that I think most fans will enjoy. I give this series a 6 out of 10. While not a great series, it does still have some of the same charm as the original He-Man, and was able to stand out from other series that had a main female lead. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.